A struggling rancher saved two indigenous youngsters from the rushing waters at daybreak. The children's father appeared with 100 braves. The youngsters were sketching something in the earth. Repeatedly, they drew the identical marking. Boon Carter was unable to comprehend its significance, yet the desperate manner in which their tiny hands worked indicated this wasn't merely play. He had rescued them from the turbulent waters 12 hours earlier amid the most severe tempest in living memory. They ought to have shown appreciation. Fear should have consumed them, yet they continued gazing toward the distant horizon as though anticipating something particular. The young girl, approximately 8 years old, continuously touched a tiny leather bag hanging from her neck. At regular intervals, she would examine its contents briefly before quickly sealing it again, as if confirming something valuable enough to risk her life protecting in those icy waters remained inside. The boy differed from her, younger, perhaps 6 years old. However, his gaze held wisdom that chilled Boon's blood. Children shouldn't observe you as though they foresaw your destiny, as if they had witnessed this moment previously. When the tempest finally subsided, Boon believed the danger had passed. His assumption proved incorrect. As dawn's initial light illuminated his land, he detected it, a sound that froze his blood. The steady rumble of many horses, more than he had ever heard simultaneously. The children ceased their drawing. They exchanged glances filled not with terror, but with acknowledgement. That moment revealed to Boon that the symbol they had been etching in the soil wasn't random. It was communication, a warning, whether intended to shield him or prepare him for approaching events. He would soon discover. Boon seized his rifle from its position above the entrance. His trembling hands verified the chamber contained only 3 bullets remaining, 3 rounds against what sounded like an approaching army at his modest homestead. The children had abandoned their frantic sketching and now remained motionless, listening to the distant thunder of hooves. The girl gripped her leather pouch more tightly, while the boy approached the window and pressed his face to the glass. Neither displayed fear, which terrified Boon more than the advancing riders. "Move away from there," Boon whispered, drawing the boy from a window. As he did so, he glimpsed what crested the ridge. Warriors, more than he had witnessed in one location, moved in flawless formation across the grassland. Their mounts created a dust cloud extending from horizon to horizon. Leading them rode a man whose demeanor commanded respect even from afar. Tall, erect, adorned with feathers catching the morning sunlight. Boon's thoughts raced. For 8 years since Ruth's passing, he had inhabited this land, maintaining harmonious relationships with neighboring tribes. He conducted fair trades, never extracted more than necessary from the river, and honored boundaries established long before his arrival. Why would they come for him now? The explanation stood beside him. 2 children who had nearly perished in his river, whom he had warmed beside his fire, nourished from his meager supplies, and sheltered through the night. Children who clearly belonged to someone significant enough to command 100 warriors. The girl stepped forward, placing her small hand on Boon's arm. She gazed up at him with dark eyes holding surprising wisdom, then indicated the symbol she had been drawing. Daylight made it clearer now, not random scratches, but a deliberate design. 3 wavy lines intersected by a single straight mark. Boon knelt to examine the symbol more closely. The undulating lines might represent the river where he discovered them. The straight line could indicate his property, fence boundary, or something else entirely. The horse sound grew louder. They would arrive within minutes. The boy tugged Boon's sleeve and pointed toward the cabin's rear. He gestured with his hands, covering his eyes, then pointing to himself and his sister, then toward the root cellar behind the house. They desired to hide, but this would make Boon appear guilty of wrongdoing. How could he explain that he had rescued these children rather than taken them? How could he make 100 angry warriors understand his helpful intentions? The girl shook her head firmly upon seeing Boon, considered the boy's suggestion. She walked to front entrance, placed her palm flat against the wood, then looked back at Boon with determination belonging to someone much older. She wanted to confront whatever approached. The horses drew close enough for Boon to feel vibrations through his boots, close enough to observe individual riders, weapons, and the grim expressions of men prepared for battle. Leading them all was a warrior chief whose children Boon had pulled from the river, a man who had no way of knowing whether the stranger in the cabin was their rescuer or captor. The lead warrior raised his hand, and 100 horses stopped as one. The silence that followed was more terrifying than their thunderous approach. Boon stepped onto his porch, rifle held low but visible. He had made his decision: meet them directly rather than cower inside like a guilty man. The children flanked him, the girl to his right, the boy to his left. Their presence beside him felt both like protection and condemnation. The chief dismounted with fluid grace. He was younger than Boon had expected, perhaps 35, with scars on his arms speaking of many battles won. His eyes swept over the cabin, corral, and the small vegetable garden Ruth had planted years ago, taking in every detail of Boone's modest life. When those dark eyes finally settled on Boone, the rancher felt the weight of judgment. This was a man accustomed to being obeyed, feared, and respected, a man who could end Boone's life with a single gesture to his warriors. But when the chief's gaze found the children, everything changed. His stern expression cracked, and relief flooded his features so completely that momentarily he resembled any father who had found his lost children safe. The girl broke away from Boone and ran toward him, calling out in words Boone couldn't understand, but whose meaning was unmistakable. "Papa." The chief dropped to one knee and gathered both children in his arms, his face buried in their hair. Boone heard him whisper words in their native tongue, soft, desperate words requiring no translation. Several warriors behind him relaxed their grips on their weapons. But the reunion was brief. The chief stood, his expression hardening again as he studied Boone. He spoke in careful, accented English. "I am Kestrel, the northern wind. These are my children. I'm Boon Carter. I pulled them from the river yesterday during the storm." Kestrel's eyes narrowed. "My children do not go near the river alone. They know the danger." The implication hung in the air like smoke. If the children wouldn't approach the river independently, someone must have taken them there. Someone like the white rancher living closest to the water. The girl stepped forward and began speaking rapidly to her father in their language, gesturing toward Boone, toward the river, toward the sky. She was telling the story, but Boone couldn't understand a word. His life hung on the translation of a frightened 8-year-old. Kestrel listened intently, his expression unreadable. When she finished, he knelt and examined something in her hands, the leather pouch she had protected so fiercely. He opened it carefully and removed what appeared to be a small piece of carved bone. His face went pale as he studied it, turning it over in his palm. Whatever he saw there changed everything about his posture, breathing, and entire demeanor. The chief stood slowly and looked at Boone with new eyes. Not the eyes of a grateful father, but something much more complex. Something that made the hair on Boone's neck stand up. "Where exactly did you find my children?" Kestrel asked, his voice deadly quiet. "About 2 miles downstream, caught in the rocks near Devil's Bend." Kestrel's jaw tightened. Devil's Bend is sacred ground. No one goes there without permission, especially not children. The carved bone in his hand seemed to pulse with significance that Boone couldn't comprehend. "Someone sent them there," Kestrel continued. "Someone who wanted them to find what they found." Kestrel held up the carved bone so his warriors could see it. Several of them shifted uneasily on their horses, and Boone caught whispered words pass between them. Whatever that piece meant, it carried weight among these men. "This belongs to my father," Kestrel said, his voice carrying across the silence. "He died 3 winters ago and was buried with his possessions at Devil's Bend, as is our way." Boone felt his stomach drop. "Your children found this in the grave." "Not found, led to." Kestrel's eyes hardened. "Someone told them exactly where to dig. Someone who knew our burial customs, our sacred places, and our language." The implications hit Boone like a physical blow. Someone had manipulated children into desecrating a grave, knowing they'd be caught in the storm, knowing they'd need rescue, knowing exactly who lived closest to that stretch of river. "You think I sent them there?" Boone asked, his voice barely steady. "No." The answer surprised him. "You are not clever enough for such a plan, and your eyes hold no lies when you speak of pulling them from the water." Kestrel walked closer to Boone, the carved bone still in his palm. "But someone wants me to believe you are responsible. Someone who knows that finding my father's grave marker in the hands of a white rancher would demand blood payment. Boone's throat went dry. Blood payment. Our law is clear. Disturb the sacred resting place of a chief, and your life is forfeit. Kestrel's warriors murmured agreement behind him. That is why someone chose this particular bone to plant with my children. They wanted me to ride here with 100 warriors and kill you. The girl tugged at her father's sleeve and spoke urgently in their language. She pointed toward the hills beyond Boone's property, then made gestures that looked like someone watching, hiding. Kestrel's expression grew grim. Ayana says someone followed them to the river yesterday. A man on horseback who stayed hidden in the trees. She thought he was hunting, but now we know he was watching to make sure they found what he planted. Ensuring they nearly drowned so you would be forced to rescue them. Boone finished, bringing my father's bone into your house, making you an unwitting thief of sacred objects. Boone ran his hand through his hair, trying to process the elaborate setup. Someone wanted you to kill me, but why? That is what we must discover. Kestrel turned to his warriors and spoke in rapid commands. Half of them wheeled their horses toward the hills, following Ayana's directions to search for tracks. You believe your children? Boone asked. You believe they were manipulated? Ayana has her grandmother's eyes. She sees details others miss. And Takoda. Kestrel glanced at his son, who was studying the symbol drawn in the dirt. He remembers everything exactly as it happened. Everything. The boy looked up from the ground and spoke in halting English. Man, it's Scar here. He traced a line down his left cheek. Kestrel's face went deadly still. What did you say? Scarman told us, grandfather's spirit calling from river. The chief's hands clenched into fists, and several warriors who heard the boy's words began reaching for their weapons. You know who that is, Boone said, reading Kestrel's expression. Yes. The word came out like a growl. And if I am right, this was never about you at all. A warrior rode back from the hills at full gallop, shouting to Kestrel in their language. The chief's face darkened with each word. They found tracks, Kestrel told Boone. A single horse, iron shoes, heading toward Millfield. Boone knew that town, 2 days' ride east, where territorial officials conducted land assessments and dealt with property disputes. Who was the man with the scar? Kestrel was quiet for a long moment, studying his children as if memorizing their faces. When he spoke, his voice carried old pain. His name is Marcusgon. He was a translator for the territorial government during the treaty negotiations 5 years ago. Until we discovered he was changing our words when he translated them. Treaties we thought protected our hunting grounds actually gave away our rights to the river and the sacred sites. Boone felt pieces clicking into place. Devil's Bend, among others. When we protested, the officials claimed we had agreed to the terms. It was Gon's word against ours. Kestrel's jaw tightened. But my father was there for every meeting. He kept detailed records in our own writing. Records that could prove the translations were false. Records that were buried with him, as tradition demands. Kestrel held up the carved bone again. This bone contains marks that reference those documents. God knows if anyone ever finds my father's burial site and examines what was placed there, his deception will be exposed. The elaborate setup made sense now. So, he tricks your children into disturbing the grave, knowing you'd have to kill whoever possessed sacred objects, eliminating the only witness to his crimes and ensuring the burial site remains undisturbed forever. While he claims more tribal land through forged agreements, Kestrel looked toward Millfield. Ayana ran to her father and whispered something urgent in his ear. Kestrel's expression grew grim. What did she say? Boone asked. Gon told them if they brought the bone to the white rancher by the river, their grandfather's spirit would be at peace. Kestrel's voice grew deadly quiet. He used their love for their grandfather to make them accomplices in his plan. The sound of approaching horses made everyone turn. The warriors who'd gone to search the hills were returning, and they weren't alone. They'd found someone. Between two mounted warriors rode a man on a tired horse, his hands bound behind his back. Even from a distance, Boone could see the scar running down his left cheek. Marcusgon had not made it to Millfield. As the group approached, Gon's eyes darted between Kestrel and Boone, calculating his chances. When he spoke, His voice carried the smooth confidence of a man accustomed to talking his way out of trouble. "Chief Kestrel, I've been searching for your children all night. Thank the Lord they're safe." Kestrel stepped forward, and every warrior present shifted to attention. "You have been searching for them?" "Of course. When I saw the storm coming, I worried they might be caught out in the open. I've been riding since dawn, checking every homestead between here and town." It was a reasonable story. If not for Takoda's clear memory and Ayana's sharp eyes, it might have been believable. Kestrel walked to within arm's reach of the bound man. "My son says you spoke to them yesterday. Told them their grandfather was calling from the river." For the first time, uncertainty flickered across Gon's features. Children often imagine things, especially during storms. Perhaps the boy misunderstood. "Show him," Kestrel commanded. One of the warriors opened Gon's saddlebags and removed several items: territorial documents, surveying tools, and a leather pouch identical to the one Ayana had carried. Inside the pouch were more carved bones. Gon's face went pale as Kestrel examined the additional carved bones. Each one bore markings similar to the piece Ayana had carried, symbols that clearly belonged at a sacred burial site. "I can explain," Gon said quickly. "I found these scattered along the riverbank. I was bringing them to you, knowing they must be important to your people." Kestrel held up one of the bones, rotating it slowly. "This belonged to my grandfather's grandfather. It has not seen daylight for 60 years. His voice dropped to a whisper that somehow carried more menace than shouting. "You've been robbing graves." "That's not." "Be silent." Kestrel's command cut through Gon's protest like a blade. "Takoda, tell this man what he said to you yesterday." The boy stepped forward, his young voice clear and precise. Scarman said, "Grandfather's bones make powerful medicine for white settlers." Said, "If we bring them to Rancher Man, we get reward money." Said, "Grandfather wants his bones to help his grandchildren." Gon's face crumpled as his careful lies fell apart. The boy is confused. Children don't understand. "Ayana," Kestrel continued, "what else did this man tell you?" The girl spoke in English, each word carefully pronounced. "He said you would be proud. Said bringing bones to white man would show we trust white people. Make peace." The manipulation was breathtaking in its cruelty. Gon had used the children's desire to honor their grandfather and make their father proud, twisting their innocent trust into tools for his own schemes. Boon stepped forward, his anger finally overriding his caution. "You used children to rob graves. Made them think they were helping their family, while you planned to get me killed for your crimes. You don't understand the complexities of territorial law." Gon replied, some of his smugness returning. "These artifacts belong in museums, not rotting in the ground. I was preserving history." "Whose history?" Kestrel asked quietly. "American history. Civilized history." Gon's mask was slipping completely now. This land will be properly developed eventually. These primitive burial customs can't stand in the way of progress forever. Several warriors raised their weapons at the insult, but Kestrel raised his hand for restraint. "You forged treaties," Boon said. "Changed translations to steal land." "I corrected translations," Gon replied defiantly. "Made them reflect the reality of territorial expansion. What was going to happen anyway? And when Chief Kestrel's father kept records that proved your deception, I ensured those records would never surface." Gon looked directly at Kestrel. "Your father was a stubborn old man who couldn't accept that his way of life was ending." The words hung in the air like smoke from a powder keg. Boon saw Kestrel's hand move toward his knife, saw the barely controlled rage in every line of his body. But before anyone could act, one of the warriors on the perimeter shouted a warning. More riders were approaching from the east. Territorial officials by their uniforms and bearing. Gon's expression shifted to something approaching relief. "You see? The proper authorities are here. This matter will be handled through official channels." Kestrel studied the approaching officials, then looked at the evidence in his hands. "Perhaps, but first, these men will hear exactly what you have done. My word against that of savages and a dirt-poor rancher?" Gon laughed harshly. "I think not." But his confidence wavered when he saw Boon pull a folded paper from his shirt pocket. The territorial survey notice that had been posted on his fence just last week. a notice bearing Marcus Gahn's signature as the official translator. The territorial officials rode into the tense standoff with the confidence of men accustomed to authority. Their leader, a heavy-set man with silver hair and territorial badges, surveyed the scene with obvious displeasure. "I'm Commissioner Walsh," he announced. "We receive reports of an armed gathering that threatens territorial peace." Gahn straightened in his bonds. "Commissioner, thank God you're here. I've been taken prisoner by these savages. They're threatening to kill me over some misunderstanding about artifacts." Walsh's eyes moved between the 100 warriors, the bound translator, and Boone standing with the children. "Mr. Gahn, you were supposed to file your survey reports yesterday. When you failed to appear, we came looking. As you can see, I've been detained against my will." Kestrel stepped forward, holding the carved bones where Walsh could see them. "Commissioner Walsh, this man has been robbing our sacred burial sites. He manipulated my children into desecrating graves." "Preposterous," Gahn interjected quickly. "These people are obviously trying to interfere with legitimate territorial business. They're angry about lawful land assessments." Walsh examined the carved bones with interest. "These do appear to be significant artifacts. Mr. Gahn, are these part of your archaeological surveys?" "I found them scattered by the river," Gahn replied smoothly. "I was bringing them to the proper authorities for cataloging, but—" Boone stepped forward with the survey notice. "Commissioner, this document bears Mr. Gahn's signature. It authorizes a land assessment of my property for potential territorial acquisition." Walsh took the paper and studied it carefully. "Yes, this appears to be in order. The survey was conducted yesterday." Boone continued. "But according to Mr. Gahn, he was searching for missing children all night and found these artifacts by accident this morning." The contradiction hung in the air. Walsh looked from the document to Gahn, his expression sharpening. "Mr. Gahn, when exactly did you conduct this survey?" There may be some confusion about the timing." "There's no confusion," Ayana said clearly. "Scarman came to our camp 3 days ago, told us about grandfather's bones, said, 'Bring them to White Man by River.'" Walsh's attention focused on the girl. "You're saying Mr. Gahn visited your village 3 days ago?" "Yes," Takoda added, "before the storm. Told us secret about bones making peace." The commissioner's face darkened as he began to understand the implications. "Mr. Gahn, if you were in a tribal village 3 days ago, how do you explain conducting a survey yesterday that you claim prevented you from searching for these children?" Gahn's carefully constructed lies were collapsing faster than he could rebuild them. "The children are mistaken. The stress of being lost has confused their memories." "Both children?" Walsh asked skeptically. "With identical false memories?" "Commissioner," Kestrel said quietly, "there's more you should know about Mr. Gahn's activities." One of the warriors brought forward additional evidence found in Gahn's saddlebags, documents detailing other burial sites, sketches of sacred locations, and most damning of all, a list of territorial officials with notations about their willingness to overlook irregularities in exchange for compensation. Walsh's name was not on the list, but several of his colleagues were. The commissioner's face went white as he read the documents. "Mr. Gahn, these papers suggest a systematic pattern of grave robbery and official corruption. Those are research notes, academic study of indigenous burial practices." But it was too late. The evidence was overwhelming. The contradictions impossible to explain away. Walsh looked up from the papers with the expression of a man who had just discovered betrayal in his own ranks. "Mr. Gahn, you are under arrest for fraud, theft of artifacts, and corruption of territorial proceedings." As Walsh's men bound Gahn's hands with official restraints, the corrupt translator made one final desperate attempt to save himself. "Commissioner, you're making a grave mistake. These savages have obviously coerced a rancher into supporting their lies. They're trying to undermine legitimate territorial expansion." Walsh studied the evidence in his hands. The forged documents, the stolen artifacts, the systematic corruption. "Mr. Gahn, these papers are in your handwriting. The corruption list includes payments you received. The children's testimony is consistent and detailed. Children can be coached." "By whom?" Walsh interrupted. "A poor rancher who's never left the property. A tribal chief who had no knowledge of your crimes until this morning. Gon's face twisted with rage as his final lie crumbled. Fine. Yes, I altered some translations. But I was protecting American interests from these primitive savages who don't understand progress. The admission hung in the air like a confession at trial. Kestrel stepped forward, his voice calm but carrying deadly authority. Commissioner Walsh, by your laws, this man has confessed to theft, fraud, and desecration of sacred sites. What is the penalty? Prison. Mr. Gon will face territorial court and likely serve several years for his crimes. Walsh looked uncomfortable. And the lands he stole through false treaties that will require extensive legal review to determine which agreements were corrupted. While you conduct your legal review, Kestrel said quietly, my people remain homeless on land where our ancestors are buried. The commissioner had no answer for that injustice. Boon found himself speaking before he'd fully formed the thought. What if there was another way? Both Walsh and Kestrel turned to him. My property borders the river for 3 miles. The water rights, the grazing land, the access to Devil's Bend. Boon looked directly at Kestrel. I never asked for ownership of sacred ground. What are you suggesting? Walsh asked. A trade. My land borders yours anyway. What if, instead of lengthy court battles, we simply corrected the boundaries? Give back what was taken through fraud. Kestrel studied Boon with new respect. You would give up your property? I'd be giving up land that was never rightfully mine to begin with. Boon gestured toward his small cabin, his modest corral. I don't need 3 miles of river frontage. Never did. But where would you live? Boon had been thinking about that since the moment he'd pulled 2 children from the rushing water. I've been alone on this ranch for 3 years, ever since my wife died. Maybe it's time I found a different way to live. Ayana tugged at her father's sleeve and whispered something in their language. Kestrel listened, then smiled for the first time since arriving. My daughter asks if the man who saved their lives would consider becoming family. The offer hit Boon like a physical blow. Family? Something he'd given up hope of ever having again. What does that mean? He asked carefully. It means a place in our village. Work that matters. Children who already trust you. Kestrel glanced at his son and daughter, and the chance to help prevent future Marcus Gans from destroying what both our peoples value. Walsh watched this exchange with obvious relief. A voluntary land transfer would avoid years of legal battles and territorial tension. Mr. Carter, are you certain about this decision? Boon looked at his small ranch, the cabin where he'd spent 3 lonely years, the fence line that marked the boundary of his isolation, the river that had brought him 2 children and changed everything. Commissioner, I've never been more certain of anything in my life. 3 months later, Boon Carter sat beside the river at Devil's Bend, watching Ayana and Takoda play in the shallow water under the careful supervision of their grandmother. The sacred burial site had been properly restored, the stolen artifacts returned to their rightful place, and the children had learned to swim in the calmer pools upstream. Commissioner Walsh had been true to his word. Marcus Gon was serving 5 years in territorial prison for fraud, theft, and corruption. The forged treaties had been declared void, and the stolen lands returned to Kestrel's people. 3 other territorial officials named in Gon's corruption list had been dismissed from their positions. Boon's old cabin sat empty now, though Kestrel had suggested they maintain it as a meeting place between the tribal council and territorial officials, a neutral ground where future agreements could be negotiated honestly. You are thinking too much again, Kestrel said, settling beside Boon on the grass. Just remembering. The storm. The choice. Boon watched the children splash in the water, their laughter carrying across the peaceful valley. When I pulled them from the river, I thought I was just saving 2 lives. You saved more than that. Kestrel followed his gaze. You saved my family, my people's sacred ground, the truth about the treaties. I was just doing what anyone would do. No. Kestrel's voice was firm. What you did required courage, not just to jump in a river, but to trust when 100 warriors rode to your door, to give up your land when you could have fought to keep it. Boon smiled. Best decision I ever made. And it was. His new life in the village had given him purpose he'd never known before. He helped negotiate fair trade agreements between the tribe and territorial settlements. He taught Ayana and Takoda to read and write English while they taught him their language. He had become what Kestrel called a bridge builder, someone who could help both peoples understand each other. Papa Boon, Ayana called from the water. Come see what we found. The two men walked to the river's edge where the children were examining something in the sand. It's a turtle nest, Takoda announced proudly, using his English words carefully. Grandmother says babies will hatch when leaves change color. Just like you found them, Ayana added, grinning at Boon, in the water, waiting to be rescued. Boon knelt beside the small depression in the sand where tiny turtle eggs lay buried, new life waiting to emerge, just as his own life had emerged from the rushing waters of that storm 3 months ago. We'll have to protect them, he said. Make sure they're safe when their time comes. Just like you protected us, Ayana said, taking his hand. Kestrel placed a hand on Boon's shoulder. Come, the council meeting starts soon, and they want your opinion on the new trading post proposal. As they walked away from the river, Boon glanced back at the peaceful scene. Children playing, sacred ground restored, two peoples learning to trust each other. The 100 warriors who had ridden here seeking blood had instead found justice. The poor rancher who had lived alone for 3 years now had a family and a purpose. Sometimes salvation came disguised as a storm. Sometimes the greatest threats brought the greatest gifts. And sometimes pulling 2 children from a river was exactly what the world needed to heal old wounds and build new bridges. The rescue that began everything was complete. If you enjoyed the story, click the video on your screen now to watch another unforgettable tale from the frontier, where courage and compassion collide in ways you never expected. Don't forget to subscribe and consider a super chat to help us keep bringing you more stories like these. Your support means everything to us.